Welcome back to the All Things Carolina Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie G, and on today's episode, we're going to be highlighting what we're expecting from the North Carolina Tar Heels men's basketball program this upcoming season. So stay tuned, and we hope you enjoy today's episode. Before we get into the main topic of today's episode, once again, thanks for tuning in. I'd like to talk about the last two previous years for the Tar Heels men's basketball team. So the first year, you beat Duke 2 times, one time at Duke and send Coach K and L at his last home game. You have a lot of hype after that. You go on to beat him again in the Final Four. That sent him into retirement. Caleb Love hitting a crazy shot. Armando Bacot playing through an injury. Then after that, you lose. Everything just starts to go downhill from there. You lose to Kansas in the national championship game. Up by 15 at halftime, and you fail to convert, which is just a huge disappointment. Then after that, what happens is the next year, obviously you're number one pre-ranked. You have a lot of hype. The fans are excited, thinking the same thing's going to happen as next year. And and pretty much all that happens is the total opposite. You try to replace a guy like Brady Manek with a guy like Pete Nance, and it's just Brady Manek is just a whole other level of a player. And Pete Nance just could not get the job done. And Pete Nance is a solid player. It's just no one's going to replace Brady. And then after that, the team just starts to fall apart too. As I mentioned, you don't make the Final Four, the NCAA tournament. That's only the fourth time since 1979. There's only been four times, including the Tar Heels. So with these new recruits, I think Hubert Davis did a pretty good job. He's known for good recruiting, and he has a nice class ahead of him. Elliot Cadeau coming in, and I think we'll just have to see. Obviously the first game, these players aren't going to click all together. I'm looking. Thinking about how these players, they're going to have to settle in. But I just really want to know how these players are going to be able to. There's so many guards, I feel like, but I don't know. We'll just have to see how they all fill in the court together. And I know Hubert Davis did a good job, but let's get into the main topic of today's episode. I'm going to still talk a little bit about last year, how we tried to fix some of these things, and how we're trying to fix some of these things this upcoming year. So let's get into the main topic. To start off the main topic of today's episode, I'd like to list off some of these new players coming in. Zayden High, Paxton Wojcik, Jalen Withers, James Okonkwo, Cormac Ryan, and then you have Elliot Cadeau and Harrison Ingram. I think Harrison Ingram will do a great job helping fill in Leaky Black's position. He's a junior small forward, 6'7", 230 pounds. Leaky, you know him as a lockdown defender, and you just need someone to be able to fill in his spot. More of a defensive player than offensive player, although Leaky did have a tremendous impact on the offensive side of the court last year at the end of the season. And then you also have R.J. Davis, Caleb Love and Tyler Nickel transferring, as well as Dontrez Styles and DeMarco Dunn. So you need some guards to help step in. Obviously, R.J. and Elliot Cadeau. But then if you need someone else, you also are going to have Cormac Ryan, Seth Trimble, who is improved tremendously over the offseason, developing his shot and has better ball handling. He's only a sophomore too, so he's a bright future ahead of him for the Tar Heels. And then you also have Paxton and just Paxton. So if you really need some guys to help RJ out, build around him, foul trouble, these guys can all step up. And then obviously you have Armando Bacot and Jalen Washington. Jalen Washington will be a huge part of the team the next few years. You obviously, Zayden High, a freshman power forward, 6'9", 225 pounds. I think he has a lot of potential too, as well as Jalen and all these other guys. Then you have Jalen Withers, who's also a power forward, and I think he has definitely a lot of potential too. And all these guys can take help build around Armando Bacot, Jalen Washington, as well as R.J. Davis. All these guys I feel like can just fit in good together. Elliot Cadeau, huge, great player. We'll have to see how he turns out. And then you have some of these more, once again, as I mentioned, Harrison Ingram. So I think all these guys will definitely just be great fitting together. You have the guard side, and then you have a couple forwards here and there, and then you have more of the big guys that'll just all build around each other. And I think the team should be great next year. don't want to get our hopes up, though. So let's talk about some of the things from last year as well, how we're trying to fix it with this year. You had Pete Nance, forward, kind of trying to almost build around Leaky Black, but then he's trying to also, his main purpose is they brought him in, they think he's going to be like Brady Manick. That did not happen, and then he turned out to pretty much, I don't want to say he's a bad player. He's just, the Tar Heels shooting terrible from 3 last year. Pete Nance having a big part of that. And then he's also not a good he's a pretty good ball handler, I say, but he's not good at driving the basketball compared to how Armando Bacot is a really low post player who can dominate. And I just think Jalen Washington was a better player than he was. And Jalen Washington has a nice shot too. So I think next year we'll just have to kind of see how all these players work. But I'm hoping that Jalen Washington, Armando Bacot, all these new forwards and guards will all build around each other and kind of fill in that gap that Brady Manick had, compared to how you just try to rely on one guy, Pete Nance, last year. And obviously, Caleb Love leaving too. Seth Trimble is developing to be a very great player. So I think, obviously, the next year will be amazing. And, obviously, you don't know until you see the first couple of games. But I think the next year should have a lot to hold for the Tar Heels and for their overall program. The next topic I'd like to get into is the how we're going to rotate between all the guards we have next year for the Tar Heels. You have RJ and Elliot Cadeau, which is a huge just dynamic duo. I think they're definitely, both of them will be starting my predicted starting lineup next year. Armando Bacot, RJ Davis. You have once again Elliot Cadeau, and I do think Jalen Washington will start at power forward. And then I think Harrison Ingram should be the small forward starting lineup. I think that's the starting lineup for next year. So we only have one small forward in Harrison Ingram, but here's what I'm talking about guard control is, I mentioned earlier, RJ and Elliot definitely starting the 2, and then once again, at some point, one of them is going to flip and one of them will stay in, how we kind of did with RJ and Caleb last year. I think Cormac Ryan, Seth Trimble, Paxson, those 3 will be the main rotation. But if I had to choose who I think the main guys are going to be, I think Seth and Cormac. I think they're the main guys right now. And I want to see Paxson I think he'll be more of a, he's a senior, but I think more later in the season we might use him more. But I just think he's on another, I think Seth Trimble and Cormac Ryan are a level above him in terms of players. Just overall, they can do all the things guards need to do. And then I think Elliot Cadeau is just, you already know he's going to be amazing. Seeing his highlights, he's going to be something else for the Tar Heels. And I think the team has a bright season ahead of them, but we'll just have to wait and see this upcoming season. We hope you enjoy this brief overview of the upcoming season for the North Carolina Tar Heels men's basketball team, including the player potential of these new recruits. For all things Carolina sports, I'm your host, Charlie G. Stay tuned for future episodes, and thanks for listening.